The thermometer on my deck read -8 degrees when the power went out across half of Bellingham, Washington, and that was before you factored in the wind chill coming off Bellingham Bay. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the company alert system, already knowing what I would see. Ice storm damage across 3 substations. Estimated restoration time 18 to 24 hours. This was going to be a long night, and I still had 2 hours before I needed to report to the Emergency Command Center. My name is Frank Yardley, and I have been the regional manager for Pacific Northwest Electric Company for the past 7 years. I know how these storms work. I have seen transformers explode like fireworks, watched utility poles snap like toothpicks under the weight of ice, and coordinated restoration efforts that stretched my crews to their absolute limits. But right now, in this moment, I was just another homeowner trying to keep warm in a powerless house. I went down to the basement and pulled out the 3 industrial space heaters I kept for emergencies exactly like this one. These were not cheap plastic units from a big box store. These were commercial-grade heaters that ran on propane, completely independent of the electrical grid. I had purchased them years ago after watching too many elderly residents get hospitalized for hypothermia during extended outages. The irony of the electric company manager using non-electric heat was not lost on me, but I believed in being prepared. I was setting up the first heater in my living room when I heard the aggressive knock on my front door. Not a polite tap or a friendly neighborhood check-in kind of knock. This was the kind of knock that demanded immediate attention and expected compliance. I already had a sinking feeling about who it might be. Standing on my porch in a puffy North Face jacket and fur-lined boots was Brenda Whitmore, the president of our Harborview Estates Homeowners Association. She was 47 years old with an asymmetrical blonde bob that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. And she had the kind of expression that suggested she had never heard the word no without launching an appeal. "Frank, I need those heaters," she said without preamble, gesturing toward my living room where the warm glow of the propane heater was already taking the edge off the cold. "Excuse me. The community center has no heat, and we are setting up an emergency shelter for the neighborhood. I am requisitioning your space heaters for community use." She said it like she was reading from a script she had prepared, probably the same speech she had used when she confiscated someone's garden gnome for violating aesthetic guidelines. I stared at her for a long moment, feeling the cold wind whip between us. "Brenda, these are my personal property. You cannot just requisition them." Actually, according to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws, in times of neighborhood emergency, the board has the authority to commandeer private resources for the greater good of the community. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling, apparently ready to show me the exact wording. That is not how property rights work. That is not how any of this works. I could feel my professional patience wearing thin, the same patience I usually reserved for dealing with angry customers who thought we controlled the weather. She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was about to share a secret. "Frank, there are families with children who need warmth. Elderly residents who could be at risk. Are you really going to be selfish about this? What would your employer think about one of their managers refusing to help during a power outage?" The implied threat hung in the frigid air between us. She clearly thought she had leverage, thought she could shame or pressure me into compliance. What she did not know was that I had already arranged for 2 emergency warming stations to be set up using company resources, complete with generators and industrial heating units. I had made those calls before the power even went out, the moment I saw the ice storm warnings. "The community center is on the priority restoration list," I said calmly, Power should be back there within 6 hours, much faster than residential areas. 6 hours is too long. People are cold now. I need those heaters. Her voice had taken on that particular pitch that I had come to recognize over the years, the one that said she was used to getting her way through sheer persistence and volume. No. The words seemed to physically stun her. She actually took a step back, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to process a foreign language. "What did you just say to me?" I said. "No, Brenda. These are my heaters. I need them for my own home. I am happy to help coordinate other warming solutions, but you are not taking my personal property." Her face flushed red, visible even in the dim light of the overcast afternoon. This is a violation of community spirit. This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior that tears neighborhoods apart. I will be bringing this up at the next board meeting, and there will be consequences. We have fines for non-compliance with emergency directives. "You do that," I said, already tired of the conversation. I had a major restoration effort to coordinate in less than 2 hours, and I did not have time for HOA theatrics. She jabbed a finger toward my chest but did not quite touch me. "You do not understand the position you are putting yourself in. I have connections, Frank. My husband is a lawyer. My cousin works for the State Utilities Commission. You think you can just ignore community obligations and there will not be repercussions?" I took a slow breath, reminding myself that losing my temper would not help anything. "Your cousin must be Denise Whitmore, then." I had lunch with her last month discussing the new renewable energy mandate. Nice woman. I am sure she would be fascinated to hear about HOA boards trying to confiscate personal property during emergencies. That stopped her momentum for a moment, but only a moment. This is not over. I will be documenting this refusal. Every detail. And when people in this neighborhood suffer because you chose to hoard resources, that blood will be on your hands. She spun on her heel and marched back down my driveway, her boots crunching on the thin layer of ice that had formed over everything. I watched her pull out her phone as she walked, already typing furiously, probably messaging the HOA board group chat or posting on the neighborhood Facebook page. I had seen this pattern before. The outrage, the rallying of support, the manufactured crisis designed to pressure someone into compliance. I closed the door and went back to setting up my heaters. My house was just over 2,000 square feet, and with proper placement and door management, 3 propane heaters could keep the main living areas comfortable enough to prevent pipe damage and hypothermia. I set one in the living room, one in the kitchen near the pipes under the sink, and kept the third one in reserve. My phone buzzed with a text from my deputy manager, Sarah Chen. "Ice damage worse than expected on the north side. 2 more poles down on Telegraph Road. Might need you at command earlier." I texted back that I could be there in 30 minutes and started gathering my gear. Insulated work coveralls, backup battery packs, my laptop, and the 3-ring binder I kept with all the emergency contact information for our key infrastructure. I was pulling on my boots when another knock came at the door, softer this time. It was my neighbor from across the street, Jim Patterson, a retired Boeing engineer who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. "Hey Frank, sorry to bother you. Brenda just came by asking if I had any extra heaters. She mentioned you had refused to help with the community center situation." "That is one way to describe it," I said. "She wanted to take my personal space heaters. I declined." Jim nodded slowly. "She is telling people you are hoarding resources while families freeze. Just thought you should know what is being said. Appreciate the heads up. For what it is worth, there are 2 warming stations being set up right now with full generator power and professional heating equipment." one at the Bellingham Community Center on Cornwall Avenue and one at the church on Alabama Street. Both will be operational within the hour, and they will have capacity for several hundred people. His eyebrows raised. She did not mention that. I imagine she did not. Look, I have to head into work to coordinate the restoration effort. If you need anything, those warming stations will have hot coffee, charging stations, and comfortable seating. Red Cross is bringing supplies. You set those up. Part of my job, I said simply. Tell anyone who needs it. I locked up my house and headed to my truck, a four-wheel drive Ford F-150 that I kept equipped for exactly this kind of weather. The roads were treacherous, coated in that particularly nasty combination of freezing rain and sleet that made every intersection an adventure. It took me 40 minutes to make what should have been a 15-minute drive to the emergency command center at our main service facility. The command center was organized chaos when I arrived. 3 shifts of line crews were being coordinated. Bucket trucks were being deployed across the region, and the main display board showed a cascade of outages across our service territory. Red zones indicated areas still without power. Yellow zones were in progress, and the handful of green zones were restored service areas. Sarah was at the main console, coordinating with dispatch and our field supervisors. She looked up when I entered and gave me a grim nod. We are looking at 36 hours minimum for full restoration. The ice brought down major transmission lines near Lake Whatcom. We have got crews coming in from Spokane and Seattle to help, but it is going to be a marathon. I shed my coat and joined her at the console, pulling up the damage reports on my tablet. 3 substations affected, over 40 distribution poles down, and countless service lines damaged by falling tree limbs. This was a major event, the kind that would make regional news and have politicians demanding answers. What is the status on critical facilities? I asked. Hospital has backup generators running clean, water treatment plant is on secondary power. Both police and fire stations are operational. We prioritized the community warming stations like you requested. Both are fully powered and operational as of 20 minutes ago. Good. Media inquiries? Constant. I have been routing them to public affairs, but they want a statement from you by 6 p.m. I checked my watch. That gave me 90 minutes to get a handle on the situation and craft something that would reassure the public without making promises we could not keep. Set up a call with public affairs at 5:30. I want current restoration estimates and crew deployment numbers before I talk to the press. The next few hours blurred together in the way they always did during major outages. Coordinating crews, managing resources, dealing with angry customers who called demanding to know when their specific house would get power, and making the hard calls about priority restoration. Hospitals and emergency services first, then critical infrastructure like water and communications, then residential areas based on the number of affected customers and accessibility for our crews. My phone kept buzzing with notifications from the neighborhood social media groups. I normally had those muted, but I had glanced at them during a brief break and immediately regretted it. Brenda had been busy. She had posted a lengthy screed about my refusal to help the community and my hoarding of essential resources during an emergency. She had described me as cold-hearted and selfish, claimed I had laughed at the idea of children being cold, and suggested that I was symptomatic of everything wrong with corporate culture. The post had dozens of comments, most of them from people I had never met, expressing outrage and disappointment. A few neighbors had tried to defend me, mentioning that I had always been helpful and that perhaps there was more to the story. They were shouted down quickly. One person even suggested that my HOA membership should be reviewed, and potentially revoked for violating community standards. The irony was thick. Here I was, coordinating the emergency response that would restore power to over 15,000 customers, including every single person in that Facebook group. And I was being vilified for refusing to give away my personal property to someone who demanded it without cause. Sarah noticed me looking at my phone and shook her head. Social media drama. HOA president trying to start a mutiny because I would not give her my space heaters. The propane ones you keep in your basement, the ones you bought with your own money, those would be the ones. She snorted. People are wild. Hey, do you want me to make a statement about the warming stations? Might take some heat off you if people knew you were the one who arranged them. I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. Let it play out. The truth will come out eventually, and I do not need credit for doing my job. Right now, I just need to focus on getting power restored. At 8 p.m., I gave my media statement from the command center, standing in front of the big display board with its constellation of red and yellow zones. I explained the extent of the damage, the resources we had deployed, and our estimated timeline for restoration. I emphasized that customers should stay away from downed power lines, conserve phone batteries, and utilize the warming stations if they needed them. One reporter asked if I had been personally affected by the outage. I confirmed that I had, that my own home was without power just like thousands of others. I did not mention the space heaters or the social media firestorm. That was not relevant to the public interest, just personal drama. By 10 p.m., we had restored power to about 30% of affected customers, prioritizing the areas with the most critical damage and the highest population density. I checked the status map and saw that the Harborview Estates area, including my house and the community center, was still firmly in the red zone. We were waiting on a new transformer to be delivered from our Seattle warehouse, and it would not arrive until morning. I caught a few hours of sleep on the couch in my office, setting an alarm for 2 a.m. to check on the night crew progress. When I woke, my phone had 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. Most were work-related, but several were from unknown numbers and 3 were from Brenda Whitmore. I ignored hers and focused on the work messages first. The transformer was arriving ahead of schedule, and crews would be able to start installation by 6 a.m. If everything went smoothly, power would be restored to my neighborhood by late morning. Against my better judgment, I opened the text messages from Brenda. The first one, sent at 6 p.m. Your refusal to help has forced families to travel in dangerous conditions to reach warming stations. This is your fault. The second one, sent at 8:30 p.m. People are demanding answers. The board is convening an emergency meeting. You will face consequences. The third one, sent at 10:15 p.m. I hope you are comfortable in your warm house while children are cold. Some hero you turned out to be. I almost laughed at that last one. I was sleeping on an office couch while coordinating an emergency response, but sure, I was lounging in luxury. The lack of self-awareness was staggering. I went back to work, pushing the HOA drama to the back of my mind. There were more important things to focus on, like the crew working to repair a major transmission line in sub-zero temperatures, and the logistics of getting enough replacement equipment to restore service to the remaining customers. By 6 a.m., I was back in the command center watching the installation of the new transformer on the live camera feed from one of our bucket trucks. The crew was working efficiently despite the cold, and I made a mental note to ensure they all received recognition for their work under difficult conditions. Sarah arrived at 7 with coffee and breakfast sandwiches from a 24-hour drive-through. You look like hell, she said cheerfully. Feel like it too. How are we looking? Ahead of schedule. If the weather holds, we should have 80% restoration by 6 p.m. tonight, full restoration by tomorrow morning. Weather report, cold but clear. No more ice, no more wind, we caught a break. I bit into the breakfast sandwich and pulled up the priority restoration list. Harborview Estates was scheduled to come back online around 11 a.m. That meant my house would have power, but more importantly, it meant I could honestly tell any customers who complained that my own home was one of the last to be restored, not the first. At 10 a.m., my personal phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I almost sent it to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Frank Yardley?" The voice was male, professional, with a slight edge of annoyance, speaking. "This is Richard Whitmore, Brenda's husband. I think we need to have a conversation about your behavior during this emergency." I set down my coffee and leaned back in my chair. "I am listening." "My wife tells me you refuse to provide heating equipment for a community warming station, endangering residents and showing a callous disregard for neighborhood welfare. As an attorney, I have to tell you that this could expose you to significant liability if anyone suffers injury or property damage as a result of your refusal to assist." I let him finish his prepared speech before responding. "Mr. Whitmore, your wife demanded that I turn over my personal property to her without cause or legal authority. I declined. That is the beginning and end of this story. You have a moral obligation to your community. I have a legal obligation not to surrender my property to anyone who demands it. I am happy to help my community in reasonable ways, but your wife's demand was neither reasonable nor legal. The HOA bylaws clearly state, the HOA bylaws do not supersede state and federal property law. If your wife believes she has legal authority to confiscate personal property, she is welcome to pursue that through proper legal channels. I will be happy to defend my position in court." There was a long pause. "You are making a very big mistake. Brenda has significant support in this neighborhood. You will be ostracized, fined, made very uncomfortable." "Is that a threat?" "It is a statement of fact. You made an enemy of the wrong person." I was tired, running on 4 hours of sleep and too much coffee, and my patience for this particular brand of nonsense was completely exhausted. "Mr. Whitmore, I have been awake for most of the past 24 hours coordinating the emergency response that will restore power to your home. I arranged for 2 fully equipped warming stations with professional heating equipment, hot food, and emergency supplies. I have crews working in dangerous conditions to repair infrastructure damage. And I am being threatened by you and your wife because I would not give her my space heaters. Do you understand how absurd this is? You arranged for warming stations." "Yes, it is part of my job. I am the regional manager for Pacific Northwest Electric Company. Emergency preparedness and community safety during outages is literally in my job description." Another long pause. "Brenda did not mention that." I imagine there are a lot of things Brenda did not mention. Now, if you will excuse me, I have an emergency restoration effort to coordinate. Your power should be back on by 11 a.m. I hung up before he could respond and turned back to the display board. Sarah was watching me with an amused expression. That sounded fun. HOA president's husband trying to threaten me with legal action and social ostracism. Over the space heaters, over the space heaters. She laughed and shook her head. Some people have too much time on their hands. At 11:15 a.m., the Harborview Estates section of the map turned green. Power restored. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with my own comfort and everything to do with seeing another chunk of customers back online. We were at 75% restoration now, ahead of our estimates, and the remaining work was mostly small pockets of isolated outages that would be mopped up over the next 12 hours. I sent a message to all crew chiefs commending their work and reminding them to prioritize safety over speed. We had gotten lucky so far with no major injuries, and I wanted to keep it that way. My personal phone buzzed with another text, this time from Jim Patterson. Power is back. Also, FYI, Brenda is telling people that she personally pressured the electric company to prioritize our neighborhood. Thought you should know. I showed the message to Sarah, who rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might stick. Of course she is. You want me to make a statement correcting the record? No. Let her have her moment. The restoration priority was based on transformer availability and crew deployment logistics, but if she wants to believe she has that kind of pull, it does not hurt anything. You are nicer than I would be. I am too tired to care, I admitted. By 6 p.m., we hit 82% restoration, and I finally felt comfortable leaving the command center. I had been there for 20 straight hours, and Sarah practically pushed me out the door with orders to go home, shower, sleep, and not come back for at least 12 hours. The drive home was surreal. Traffic lights were working again, street lights were on, and houses glowed with warm light in the early evening darkness. The ice had started to melt, leaving everything slick and shiny but no longer actively dangerous. My house was blessedly warm when I entered. The furnace had kicked on automatically when power was restored, and the space heaters had cooled down enough to pack away safely. I stood in my living room for a moment, just enjoying the simple comfort of electric heat and overhead lighting. Then I made the mistake of checking my personal email. There was an official notice from the Harborview Estates HOA Board of Directors, sent to my email address with CCs to what appeared to be the entire neighborhood. The subject line read, "Formal complaint and notice of fine." I opened it, knowing it was going to be ridiculous, but needing to see exactly how ridiculous. The letter stated that I had violated Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws by refusing to assist in emergency community operations. It cited my hoarding of resources and failure to demonstrate community spirit as grounds for a formal complaint. It announced that I was being fined $500 for non-compliance with emergency directives, and that I was required to attend a special board hearing in 3 days to address my conduct. The letter was signed by all 5 board members, with Brenda's signature prominently displayed at the top as board president. I sat down at my kitchen table and read through the letter 3 times, feeling a mixture of disbelief and weary resignation. They were actually going through with this. They were actually trying to fine me $500 for not giving away my personal property. I pulled out my laptop and started doing research. HOA law was not my specialty, but I knew enough to understand that what they were attempting was legally questionable at best. The section of the bylaws they were citing was vague and had never been tested in court. More importantly, it almost certainly could not be used to justify confiscation of personal property without compensation. I spent an hour drafting a formal response, carefully worded and citing specific Washington state property law. I pointed out that their interpretation of the bylaws was overly broad and likely unenforceable. I noted that I had in fact assisted with emergency operations through my professional capacity, providing resources far more substantial than my personal space heaters. And I formally requested copies of any documentation or evidence they had regarding my supposed violation, as was my right under the HOA bylaws. I sent the response to the board's official email address and CC'd myself for record-keeping purposes. Then I forwarded the entire exchange to my own attorney, a woman named Patricia Saunders who specialized in property law and had helped me with my house purchase 7 years ago. She called me within 30 minutes of receiving the email. "Frank, this is the most ridiculous thing I have seen in months, and I deal with property disputes for a living. Can they actually fine me for this? They can try, but I would not recommend paying it. This is a massive overreach of HOA authority, and if they push it, you would have an excellent case for legal action against the board for harassment and abuse of power. Do you want me to draft a formal response? Let me see how the hearing goes first. I want to give them a chance to back down gracefully before we escalate." "Gracefully," she laughed. "Frank, they sent a formal fine notice to the entire neighborhood. They are not looking for graceful. They are looking to make an example of you. Then I guess they are going to learn an expensive lesson about property rights and abuse of authority." The next 3 days were a strange combination of normal work routine and mounting neighborhood tension. Power was fully restored across the region, and we shifted from emergency operations to damage assessment and after-action review. I spent my days in meetings analyzing our response, identifying areas for improvement, and preparing reports for the State Utilities Commission. But in the evenings, when I got home, I could feel the tension in the neighborhood. People stopped waving when I drove by. Conversations ended abruptly when I walked to my mailbox. The social media groups had continued their campaign of outrage, with Brenda adding fuel to the fire by posting regular updates about my refusal to accept responsibility and my attempts to dodge consequences. Jim Patterson stopped by the night before the hearing with a bottle of whiskey and a sympathetic expression. "I know you probably cannot talk about it, but I wanted you to know that some of us think this whole thing is insane." I asked Brenda why we did not just use the warming stations that were set up, and she said they were not convenient for neighborhood residents. "Not convenient," her exact words. "The community center is right here in the neighborhood, so she wanted it to be the warming station. She did not want people having to drive to Cornwall Avenue or Alabama Street." I poured us both a generous measure of whiskey. "So this is about her wanting to control the response, not about actual community welfare. That is how it looks to me. But she has convinced a lot of people that you are the villain here. The board is fully behind her, and they are treating this hearing like a criminal trial. Should be interesting then." The hearing was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the community center, the same building that had been at the center of the original dispute. I dressed in business casual, brought a folder with printed copies of all relevant documentation, and arrived exactly on time. The community center was packed. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. I recognized about half the faces, neighbors I had waved to for years but rarely spoke with beyond basic pleasantries. The energy in the room was hostile, like a crowd waiting for a public shaming. The board sat at a long table at the front of the room, arranged like a judicial panel. Brenda was in the center, flanked by 2 board members on each side. She had dressed for the occasion in a black pantsuit that screamed authority and had her hair styled in a way that probably required a professional. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice carrying across the room with practiced ease. "We are here tonight to address a serious violation of our community standards by one of our residents, Frank Yardley. As you all know, during the recent power outage emergency, Mr. Yardley refused to provide heating equipment for a community warming station, choosing instead to hoard resources for his personal use, while families and elderly residents suffered in the cold. There were murmurs of disapproval from the crowd. I kept my expression neutral. This kind of selfish behavior is exactly what our bylaws are designed to prevent. We are a community, and that means we look out for each other, especially during emergencies. Mr. Yardley's refusal to help represents a fundamental violation of the spirit and letter of our community agreement. She paused for effect, making eye contact with various people in the crowd. She was good at this, I had to admit. She knew how to work a room. Before we proceed with formal sanctions, we are giving Mr. Yardley an opportunity to address the board and explain his actions. Mr. Yardley, please come forward. I walked to the front of the room, very aware of the dozens of eyes following my movement. I set my folder on the small table they had provided for me and turned to face the crowd. Thank you for the opportunity to respond, I began. I want to start by clarifying what actually happened during the power outage, because there seems to be significant misinformation circulating. Brenda interrupted immediately. The facts are not in dispute. You refused to provide heaters when requested. May I finish? I asked politely but firmly. She pressed her lips together but nodded. During the power outage, Mrs. Whitmore came to my home and demanded that I turn over my personal propane space heaters for use at this community center. These heaters are my private property, which I purchased with my own money for my own use. I declined to surrender them. That is an admission of guilt, one of the other board members said, a man named Robert Steele who lived 3 streets over. It is a statement of fact, I corrected, but it is not the complete story. What Mrs. Whitmore did not tell any of you is that before the power even went out, I had already arranged for 2 professional warming stations to be established with full generator power, industrial heating equipment, hot food, and emergency supplies. There was a shift in the room's energy, a ripple of confusion. These warming stations were located at the Bellingham Community Center on Cornwall Avenue and the church on Alabama Street. They were operational within hours of the outage and had capacity for several hundred people. They were free and open to all residents. Those were not neighborhood facilities, Brenda said quickly. We wanted our own warming station here in Harborview Estates. I understand that, but my 3 personal space heaters would not have been adequate to safely heat this building for the extended outage period. The warming stations I arranged had professional equipment specifically designed for that purpose. You arranged? Another board member asked, a woman named Carol Peterson. How did you arrange public warming stations? This was the moment I had been waiting for. I arranged them through my position as regional manager for Pacific Northwest Electric Company. Emergency preparedness and community support during outages is part of my job responsibility. I coordinated with the Red Cross and our community outreach department to ensure that all residents in our service area had access to safe, warm facilities. The silence in the room was profound. People were processing this information, connecting dots that Brenda had deliberately left disconnected. You never told us you worked for the electric company, Brenda said, her voice tight. It never came up in conversation. I do not generally discuss my work with neighbors. But since you are questioning my community commitment, I think it is relevant that I spent 20 consecutive hours coordinating the emergency response that restored power to over 15,000 customers, including every person in this room. That is your job, she said dismissively. That does not excuse your refusal to help at the individual community level. I did help at the community level. I provided resources far more substantial than 3 space heaters, but I drew the line at surrendering my personal property to someone who had no legal authority to take it. Robert Steele leaned forward. The bylaws give us authority in emergency situations. I opened my folder and pulled out a printed copy of the relevant section. Section 12. Paragraph 4 states that the board may coordinate emergency responses and request voluntary assistance from residents. It does not grant authority to confiscate personal property. That is a legal distinction that matters. This is semantics, Brenda said, her face flushing. You are hiding behind legal technicalities to justify selfish behavior. No, I am standing on legal ground to protect my property rights. There is a significant difference. I pulled out another document. I consulted with a property attorney about this matter. Would you like me to read her legal opinion about the enforceability of your fine? The board members exchanged glances. I could see the uncertainty creeping in now that this was not the simple slam-dunk case they had expected. Furthermore, I continued, I would like to know why the warming stations I arranged were deemed inadequate or inconvenient. Both facilities were within a 10-minute drive from this neighborhood. Both were professionally equipped and staffed, and both had all necessary amenities. Can you explain what specific deficiency made them unsuitable? Carol Peterson spoke up. I did not even know about those warming stations. I thought we had no options nearby. They were announced through official channels, I said. Emergency alerts, social media, local news. The information was readily available. Jim Patterson spoke from the back of the room. I used the one on Cornwall Avenue. It was great. Hot coffee, charging stations, really comfortable. My wife and I stayed there for several hours. Other voices joined in. People had used the warming stations. People had been perfectly comfortable and well cared for. The narrative that Brenda had constructed was crumbling in real time. This is getting off track, Brenda said loudly. The point is that Frank refused to help when directly asked. That shows a lack of community spirit, regardless of what other resources were available. Did I, though? I asked. Or did I refuse to comply with an unreasonable demand? Because from where I stand, I did more to help this community during that emergency than anyone in this room. I just did it through professional channels rather than surrendering to personal bullying. That is enough, she snapped. You do not get to attack this board. I am not attacking the board. I am defending myself against baseless accusations and an illegal fine. There is a difference. One of the quieter board members, a man named Thomas Green, cleared his throat. Brenda, I think we might need to reconsider this. If Frank did arrange those warming stations, that is pretty significant community support. He still refused to help when asked directly, she insisted. He refused to give away his personal property, Thomas corrected gently. That is not the same thing. The crowd was murmuring now, conversations breaking out in pockets throughout the room. The unified front of disapproval had fractured into debate and discussion. I decided to press my advantage. I would like to formally request that the fine be rescinded and this complaint be dismissed. I believe I have demonstrated that I did not violate any bylaws and that I actively contributed to community welfare during the emergency. Furthermore, I would like the board to issue a formal correction to the neighborhood regarding the facts of this situation, as there has been significant misinformation spread. Absolutely not, Brenda said. You do not get to dictate terms to this board. Then I will be forced to pursue legal action for harassment and abuse of authority. My attorney is prepared to file suit if this matter is not resolved reasonably. Robert Steele spoke up. This is getting out of hand. Maybe we should table this and meet in executive session to discuss. No, Brenda said firmly. We are settling this tonight. The board will vote on whether to uphold the fine and the complaint. All in favor. She raised her hand immediately. Robert Steele raised his hand as well, though he looked uncertain. The other 3 board members did not move. All opposed. 3 hands went up. The motion fails, Thomas Green said, looking relieved. The complaint is dismissed. Brenda's face went red. That is not how this works. I am the board president. And this is a board vote, Thomas said calmly. 3-2 means the motion fails. The complaint is dismissed and there is no fine. I call for a revote. On what grounds? Carol Peterson asked. We just voted. It is done. I watched Brenda's control slip in real time. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is a betrayal of everything this board stands for. Frank Yardley showed blatant disregard for community welfare, and you are letting him walk away with no consequences. He coordinated emergency warming stations and worked for 20 hours to restore our power, Thomas said. I would say that is the opposite of disregard. Those were not our warming stations. Those were his job, which he went above and beyond on, Carol added. I am looking at the news coverage from the outage right now on my phone. Frank gave multiple interviews and press statements during the emergency. He was clearly working his tail off. Brenda grabbed her notepad and folder, gathering them with sharp, angry movements. This board has lost its way. I will not be part of this anymore. Consider this my resignation as board president, effective immediately. She stormed out of the community center, heels clicking sharply on the floor. The room erupted in conversation, everyone talking at once. Robert Steele looked shell-shocked. Did she just quit? Sounded like it, Thomas said. He turned to me. Frank, I apologize for this entire situation. I think we all got caught up in Brenda's version of events without getting the full story. That was unfair to you. I nodded, accepting the apology. I appreciate that. For what it is worth, I do care about this community. I just was not going to be bullied into giving away my property. Totally understandable, Carol said. I would have done the same thing in your position. Jim Patterson came forward and shook my hand. Hell of a performance. You staying for coffee? I think I am going to head home. It has been a long week. I gathered my folder and headed for the door, aware that the energy in the room had completely transformed. People were looking at me with curiosity and a bit of embarrassment now, rather than hostility. Several neighbors stopped me on the way out to apologize or to ask about the warming stations or to express appreciation for the power restoration work. I made it to my truck and sat there for a moment, letting the adrenaline drain away. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Saunders. Just got off the phone with Thomas Green. He wanted legal advice on how to handle Brenda's resignation. Sounds like you made quite an impression. I texted back a brief summary of what had happened, and she responded with a string of laughing emojis and a note that she would send me a bill for the consultation time, but that it had been well worth it just for the entertainment value. I drove home through the quiet neighborhood streets, passing houses with lights on and cars in driveways and all the normal signs of suburban life. No more ice, no more emergency, just the regular rhythms of a Tuesday evening. When I got home, I poured myself a generous whiskey and sat on my back deck despite the cold, looking out at Bellingham Bay in the distance. The lights of the city reflected off the water, and I could see the running lights of boats heading into the harbor. My phone rang. Sarah Chen. I just heard from 6 different people that you got into it with your HOA board tonight, she said without preamble. Please tell me this is good gossip. I gave her the full rundown, from Brenda's dramatic accusations to her even more dramatic resignation. She laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear. You destroyed her entire case just by telling the truth. That is beautiful. Also, you are absolutely buying the first round when we all go out to celebrate next week. Deal. On a serious note though, are you okay? That sounds like it was pretty stressful. I am good. Tired of drama, but good. Just glad it is over. Think she will cause more problems. Honestly, probably. But at least now the neighborhood knows the full story and the board is not backing her up. That makes a big difference. We talked for a few more minutes about work stuff and upcoming projects. Then I let her go and finished my whiskey in peace. Over the next few days, the neighborhood social media groups went through a fascinating transformation. People who had been vocally critical of me suddenly went quiet. Others posted me culpas, admitting they had rushed to judgment without knowing the full story. A few people even thanked me directly for coordinating the warming stations and the power restoration. Brenda's posts disappeared entirely. Her account went silent and then eventually was deactivated. Jim told me through the grapevine that she and her husband were talking about moving to a different neighborhood, somewhere they could have a fresh start. The HOA board held a special election to replace her as president, and Thomas Green won easily. His first act was to send a formal letter to all residents clarifying what had happened during the power outage and acknowledging that I had gone above and beyond in supporting the community. It was not an apology exactly, but it was close enough. Life returned to normal over the following weeks. Winter settled in properly, with snow instead of ice, and the kind of cold that was crisp and clear rather than dangerous. I went to work, managed my region, and came home to my quiet house with its 3 space heaters safely stored in the basement. About a month after the hearing, I got a knock on my door on a Saturday morning. I opened it to find Carol Peterson standing there with a plate of cookies. "Peace offering," she said sheepishly. I wanted to apologize again for how that whole situation went down. I should have asked more questions before jumping on board with Brenda's complaint. I accepted the cookies and invited her in for coffee. We talked about neighborhood stuff, upcoming HOA business, and general pleasantries. She mentioned that the board was working on revising the emergency response section of the bylaws to make it clearer and more reasonable. "We are also looking at setting up a real emergency preparedness committee," she said. "Not for taking people's stuff, but for coordinating resources and information during outages or other emergencies. Would you be willing to be on it, given your professional expertise?" "I could do that," I agreed. "As long as it is focused on actual preparedness and not power trips." "Definitely." Thomas is very committed to keeping things reasonable and focused on real community benefit. It is a nice change. After she left, I sat on my couch and ate one of the cookies. It was snickerdoodle, my favorite. I thought about how close this whole situation had come to being genuinely ugly, with legal action and long-term neighborhood conflict. But it had worked out. The truth had come out. The reasonable people had prevailed, and the community was actually stronger for having gone through it. We had identified weaknesses in our emergency response planning and were addressing them. We had cleared out a board president who was more interested in control than service. And we had learned, collectively, the importance of getting the full story before rushing to judgment. A few weeks later, I was at a neighborhood barbecue that Jim Patterson was hosting. It was one of those early spring days where the sun was warm even though the air was still cool, and people were eager to get outside after a long winter. I was manning the grill, cooking burgers and hot dogs when a new family approached. They had just moved in down the street and I had not met them yet. "You are Frank, right?" the husband asked. "We have heard a lot about you." I braced myself, unsure what they might have heard. "That is me. Jim told us you are the guy who coordinated the warming stations during that big ice storm in January. We were not here yet, but that sounds like it was a major operation. Pretty cool that you live right here in the neighborhood." "Just doing my job," I said, flipping a burger. "Well, it is good to know we have someone with that kind of expertise right here if anything happens. Makes me feel better about the house purchase, honestly." His wife nodded enthusiastically. We were worried about moving to a place with such harsh winters, but knowing there are good emergency systems in place helps a lot. I handed them their burgers and pointed them toward the fixings table. As they walked away, Jim sidled up next to me with a beer. "See, you are a neighborhood hero now. I am a guy who did his job and refused to be bullied out of his space heaters. You say tomato, I say you are a legend. The story gets better every time I tell it. Please do not embellish. Too late." In my version, you faced down an angry mob while simultaneously coordinating helicopter rescues and rebuilding power lines with your bare hands. I laughed and shoved him away from the grill. "You are ridiculous. You love it." The afternoon wore on, neighbors coming and going, kids running around in the yard, the smell of grilled food and the sound of conversation filling the air. It was exactly the kind of community gathering that HOAs were supposed to foster. People coming together voluntarily because they enjoyed each other's company, not because they were compelled by rules and fines. Thomas Green caught up with me later as the sun was starting to set and the party was winding down. "I wanted to let you know that we finalized the new emergency response bylaws. They are much clearer now about what the board can and cannot do. No more vague language that can be misused." "That is good to hear. We are also setting up a neighborhood emergency supply cache, nothing fancy, just some basics like water, blankets, first aid supplies, all voluntary contributions. I was hoping you might be able to advise on what would be most useful." "Happy to help. Send me the details, and I can put together some recommendations." He thanked me and headed out, and I helped Jim clean up the last of the party debris. As I was carrying trash bags to the curb, I saw a car pull up in front of what used to be Brenda and Richard Whitmore's house. A couple got out and started walking around the property, taking pictures and pointing at features. "New buyers already?" I asked Jim. "House went on the market last week. Price to sell. I guess Brenda really wanted out. Can't say I am sorry to see them go." "Nope. Good riddance to bad energy." Although I will say, the whole situation did give the neighborhood something to talk about for months. My wife was glued to that social media group like it was a soap opera. I laughed and finished hauling the trash to the curb. The streetlights were coming on, automatic and reliable, powered by the grid that my teams maintained every single day. It was easy to take for granted until it was gone, and then suddenly, it was the most important thing in the world. The following Monday, I was back at work for a regular management meeting. Sarah had prepared a full after-action report on the ice storm response, complete with metrics, crew performance data, and customer feedback analysis. "Overall, we exceeded our performance targets," she said, pulling up a slide with restoration time comparisons. "We were 12% faster than the regional average for similar events, and customer satisfaction scores were high despite the difficult circumstances. Any areas for improvement?" I asked. Communication could be better. Some customers reported not knowing about the warming stations or feeling like they did not get enough updates on restoration times. We are looking at enhancing our alert system and social media presence. We spent an hour going through the details, identifying lessons learned and updating our emergency response protocols. It was the kind of thorough, boring, essential work that ensured we would do better next time. After the meeting, Sarah pulled me aside. "I heard through the grapevine that your HOA drama had a happy ending. News travels fast. Small communities. Everyone knows everything. For what it is worth, I thought you handled it perfectly. You did not escalate unnecessarily, but you also did not let them push you around. Good balance." "Thanks. Honestly, I was just too tired to fight. I wanted the truth to come out so I could go back to my normal, boring life. Mission accomplished then. Over the next several months, life in Harborview Estates continued to stabilize and improve. The Emergency Preparedness Committee got off the ground with solid participation from several residents who had professional backgrounds in healthcare, emergency services, and logistics. We developed a neighborhood emergency plan that was actually useful rather than an excuse for power plays. The new family that bought Brenda's old house turned out to be wonderful neighbors. The husband was a teacher, the wife was a nurse, and they had 2 young kids who quickly became fixtures of the neighborhood, riding bikes and playing basketball in the cul-de-sac. I continued my work at the electric company, managing the ongoing challenges of maintaining reliable power to a growing region while transitioning to more renewable energy sources. It was demanding work, but satisfying in the way that tangible results always are. When I turned on a light switch, I knew the systems and people that made that simple action possible. One evening in late spring, I was sitting on my deck watching the sunset when Jim came over with beers. "I have got something to tell you," he said, settling into the chair next to mine. "Should I be worried? Nah, it is good news. The board just voted to name you Neighbor of the Year. They are going to present you with a plaque at the community picnic next month." I nearly choked on my beer. "You are joking." "Dead serious. Thomas pushed for it and it passed unanimously. They cited your emergency response work during the ice storm and your ongoing contributions to community safety." "That is ridiculous. I was just doing my job." "That is what you keep saying, but the rest of us recognize that you went above and beyond. Just accept the compliment, man." I shook my head but could not help smiling. "Fine, but if they make me give a speech, I am blaming you. Deal." The community picnic was a beautiful June day, warm and sunny with a light breeze off the bay. The park was full of neighbors, kids running through sprinklers, adults playing cornhole and chatting in clusters. It was the kind of idyllic scene that HOAs put in their promotional materials. Thomas Green called everyone together in the afternoon and gave a brief speech about community values and the importance of neighbors helping neighbors. Then he presented me with a wooden plaque that read, "Neighbor of the Year in recognition of outstanding service to the Harborview Estates community." There was applause, and several people came up afterward to congratulate me or thank me again for the warming stations or just to chat. It was pleasant and low-key, exactly the right tone. As the sun set and the picnic wound down, I found myself reflecting on the entire strange journey. From a simple refusal to give away my space heaters to being publicly accused and then vindicated to being recognized as Neighbor of the Year. It was a wild ride that I would not have predicted in a million years. But more than that, it was a reminder that communities are complex, imperfect things. They are collections of individuals with different priorities, different understanding, and different approaches to problem solving. Sometimes those differences create conflict, and sometimes conflict reveals deeper truths. The HOA system, for all its flaws and potential for abuse, was ultimately just a tool. In the wrong hands, like Brenda's, it became a mechanism for control and power trips. In better hands, like Thomas and the Reformed Board, it could actually serve its intended purpose of supporting community welfare. I drove home that evening with the plaque on my passenger seat, thinking about how much had changed in just a few months. The ice storm that had started everything was a distant memory now, replaced by warm summer evenings and green lawns, and the normal rhythm of neighborhood life. When I got home, I found a perfect spot for the plaque on my office wall, right next to my various professional certifications and awards from the electric company. It looked good there, A reminder that I was more than just my job title, that I was part of a community that, for all its occasional drama, ultimately came together when it mattered. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Saw the picture Jim posted of your award ceremony. Congratulations on going from neighborhood villain to hero in record time. Pretty sure that is some kind of record. I texted back a laughing emoji and a thank you, then poured myself a whiskey and went out to my deck. The space heaters were still in my basement, right where they belonged, ready for the next emergency but mine to keep and use as I saw fit. That simple principle, that right to my own property and my own choices, had been worth defending. The lights across the neighborhood glowed, warm in the evening darkness. Every house powered by the grid that my teams maintained. Every family going about their normal evening routines without thinking about the complex infrastructure that made it all possible. That was how it should be. Power that was reliable enough to be taken for granted, there when you needed it and invisible when you did not. And if another ice storm came, if the power went out again and we faced another emergency, I knew we would be ready. Not because an HOA president demanded we turn over our personal property, but because we had built real preparedness systems and fostered real community connections. That was worth more than any number of space heaters. The summer passed peacefully, and when fall arrived with its promise of another winter, the neighborhood was better prepared than it had ever been. The Emergency Preparedness Committee had done excellent work, and we had resources and plans in place that would actually help people. I kept doing my job, managing the region, maintaining the grid, and preparing for whatever challenges the next season would bring. And when I came home each evening, it was to a neighborhood that knew me not as an enemy or a villain, but as a neighbor who had stood his ground when it mattered and contributed to the community in ways that actually helped. That was enough. That was everything.